Okay, so in the previous lecture, we had a discussion about sets, then we had discussion about relation and functions, relation and functions. Then we had talked about, which is actually the most important part, that is posets. Okay, posets. So what are posets basically? If you have a relation R on a set X, and if the relation is reflexive, the relation is antisymmetric, antisymmetric, and the relation is transitive, then such a relation is called a partial order. Such a relation is called the partial order and denoted by this less than equal to symbol. And if you have a set X with this partial order imposed on it, then such a set is called a partially ordered set. Is called a partially ordered set. Clear? Which is called a poset. Got it? Which is called the poset. Clear? So we had discussed this till now. So in this lecture, we are actually going to need the concept of poset at the maximum. The thing which we are going to discuss in this particular lecture is going to be bounds on a set. Okay, bounds on a set. Then we are going to discuss about maximal and minimal, maximal and minimal. Then we are going to hear about the condition or the lemma called Zorn's lemma. Okay, we're not going to prove it because this lecture is not actually on set theory, but rather is an introduction to real analysis. Okay, then we are going to discuss about countably infinite and finite sets. Clear? So countably infinite and finite sets. Going to be talking about cardinal number of a set, cardinal number of a set, and we are going to understand now what is the concept behind a set being finite or infinite. So let's start this lecture. I'm removing this portion and let's start. Okay. So for example, we have a set X and A and B belongs to the set X. Okay. And there is a partial order defined on the set and A and B are related by that partial order. So this is equivalent to writing with this symbol. Okay, greater than equal to symbol. I'm telling you again, guys, please do not confuse this symbol with the arithmetic inequality relation A less than equal to B. Has a different meaning. This has a different meaning. See, if this was the greater than equal to symbol or the less than equal to symbol, then we would not have used the equivalent symbol. Okay, we might have used the equal to symbol, might have used, if this meaning was the same, but the meanings are different. This is a symbol, this is a symbol denoting a partial order. Denoting a partial order. Am I clear? Okay. So now, suppose you have one more denotion you have. If you use this symbol, then this is equivalent to writing A is related to B by a partial order and A is not equal to B. Clear? Which is equivalent to writing with this symbol. These are some standard symbols or notations of partial order. Acha. Now what is a set being bounded? Okay. So for some non-empty subset of X, for some non-empty subset of X, clear? If there exists some element M which belongs to set X such that such that A is related to M by that partial order for all the elements of the subset A. for all the elements of the subset A, then A is said to be bounded above in X, and M is said to be the upper bound, also denoted as U dot B of A in X. Clear? Got it? This upper bound, it is not mandatory for the upper bound to belong to the subset A. Okay, the upper bound is not to be included in the subset A. Actually, this is not mandatory. It might be included in the subset A, but that's not always mandatory. Clear? Okay. So similarly, 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 if you have the same definition for some, let's this be B being some non-empty subset of X, if there exists some L which belongs to X such that L is related to A, or let's say B will be better. L is related to B, okay, such that, such that, okay, sorry, L is related to B for all small b belonging to the subset capital B, for all small b belonging to the subset capital B, then B is said to be bounded below. B is said to be bounded below in X, and L is said to be the lower bound, also called L dot B of B in X. Clear? So this is the basic meaning of being bounded above or being bounded below, and the meanings of upper bounds and lower bounds. Clear? Acha. Now this is pretty much evident that if there exists some n belonging to the set capital X such that n is or basically rather, suppose u or m, let's say m, we have used here the upper bound as m, such that m is related to that value n by the partial order. M is related to the value n by that partial order. Clear? Then n also becomes an upper bound of A. Then n also becomes an upper bound of A. Clear? N also becomes an upper bound of A. Similarly, 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 if there exists some L dash belonging to X such that L dash is partially related with the partial order with L, okay, where L is the lower bound, you can easily see that, okay, then L dash also becomes the lower bound of A, okay, lower bound of A. Got it? Clear? So basically we can see that we can actually form a set of upper bounds as well as a set of lower bounds. Clear? We can form a set of upper bounds as well as a set of lower bounds, because if you get some upper bound of A, then there might be further elements in X which are related to that particular upper bound, or rather the upper bound is actually related to those particular elements which also behave as the upper bound of that set. Same goes for the lower bound case. Same goes for the lower bound case. Thus the order of the elements gets interchanged. Okay, here the upper bound is getting related with the other elements, here the other elements are getting related with the lower bound. Okay, so at this moment there arises a new term called the lowest, or the least rather, the least upper bound. The least upper bound of a set, the least upper bound of a set, which is also called the supremum of the set, supremum of the set, and denoted by SUPA. Clear? Denoted by the SUPA. Got it? Also you can denote it as L dot U dot B. This is also one form of denotation. Okay. So when what sort of an element can be called the least upper bound of a set? Okay. So let's see that. So let there exists some p belonging to set x, okay, and p is called, or p is rather the least upper bound of a if, number one point, p is an upper bound, p is an upper bound of a, and the second point is that there exists some m dash belonging to x such that such that p is related to m by the partial order, p is related to m by the partial order, okay, p is related to m by the partial order. So in this case, or rather we can write it like this also, we can write it like this also, okay, this is a more definite way of writing it, okay. There exists some m belonging to the set x such that if a is related to m by the partial order for all small a belonging to subset capital A, then p will also be related with m by the partial order, okay, clear. So basically what we mean here is that, p is an upper bound of a, p is a fixed upper bound of a, and there is some m which also is an upper bound of a. But if there exists some m which is an upper bound of a, then what happens is that the upper bound p will also be related to m by the partial order, okay. This is the meaning of least upper bound, or when this condition is satisfied, a particular a particular element or particular thing of a is called the least upper bound, okay, element is called the least upper bound, okay. This portion is clear, I guess. Similarly, you can also form the concept of greatest lower bound, okay. Here you have least upper bound, and the converse condition tells you the greatest lower bound, got it. So let's see what is the greatest lower bound condition. That is also pretty simple. So similarly, okay, if you have some b, which is a subset, in the above case we had considered a to be a non-empty subset of x, here we are considering b as the non-empty subset of x, okay. So L belonging to b is called the greatest lower bound of b if if first thing, for all small a belonging to this for all small b belonging to the capital set capital B, there exists this L, or rather this L, okay, belonging to the, you know acha, this must belong to capital X, sorry. So this L belonging to the set capital X, L belonging to the set capital X, okay, will be will be related to A by the partial order, sorry, related to B by the partial order, clear. And there, if there exists some m dash, okay, which, also acts as an upper bound of this set B, that is, okay, such that, rather say, belonging to X, such that m is also related to B by the partial order, m is also related to B by the partial order for all small b belonging to the non-empty subset capital B, then m must also be related to L by the same partial order, okay. So they are kind of comparable, but the difference arises in the order of the relation, got it. Then this element L will be called the greatest lower bound, also will be called the infimum, okay. So as the lowest least upper bound is called the supremum, the greatest lower bound is called the infimum of B, and also denoted as INFB, clear, INFB, got it, okay. Now arises the concept of maximal and minimal. So let's see, maximal and minimal, okay. So maximal and minimum elements, when when you first get to introduce yourself with these terms, they often seem to be You often seem to get confused with what is the difference between a maximal element and the supremum of the set. Okay. So let's first write the definition and then understand the difference. Acha, what is the maximal element? So if you know A is an element of X, okay, and M is related to A by the partial order, then M equals A. Okay. Here M is called the maximal element. Here M is called the maximal element. Okay, element. So carefully notice what is being told here. So you have a set X, and you have an element A of the set X, and this M element, okay, this is also belonging to X, rather this is also belonging to X, and this element is related to A by the partial order, and if so, then the elements will be equal to each other, that is M will equal to A. If this condition happens, then only it is called the maximal element. So can you carefully notice what is the difference between a supremum and the maximal element? In supremum, what was happening? If you have a non-empty set of X, if you have a non-empty set of X and you have an element in the set X such that A is related to X by the partial, sorry, A is related to M by the partial order for all small a belonging to subset capital B, for all small a belonging to subset capital B, then M was called the upper bound. Okay, and if it satisfies the condition of the least upper bound, then it is called the supremum. Okay, but here the for all elements case does not appear. For all elements case does not appear. Acha, it is better to understand this using an example. This is better to understand this using an example. This might be a bit confusing, but this example will help us. Okay, so in the previous lecture we had used an example of partial order where we considered the set of all natural numbers with the partial order set like this, such that m and n belonging to n. Okay, and remove the such that sign. So small m and small n belongs to the set capital N, that is set of all natural numbers, such that m related to n by the partial order signifies that m divides n. Clear? That is indicates that m divides n. So this was the partial order we had checked in the previous lecture. I am telling this to you again. So you can easily notice that m divides m. Okay. So basically this is reflexive. Okay. So if m divides n and n divides m, so this is pretty much easy to notice that m is equals to n. So this is anti-symmetric. This is anti-symmetric, and if m divides n and n divides say k, where k also belongs to this set of natural numbers, then that implies m divides k. So it is also transitive. Clear? So this is in a partial ordered set or a partial ordered relation rather. Achha. So now what we do is that we consider a subset X, okay, and X is non-empty. X is non-empty. So let X be the natural numbers till 10. So it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10. Acha. Now find out whether this set has a maximal element or not. It is pretty much easy to find out that 10 will be a maximal element. The reason is what? See, what is the element in this? Is there any element in this particular set? Is there any element in this particular set which can be related to 10? Which can be related to 10? No, only 10 can be related to itself. Okay, so we can say that if m is related to a where m is 10, then a is also 10, that is m equals 10. So what we have here is that 10 is a maximal element. 10 is a maximal element. 10 is a maximal element. But is there any element? Is there, or rather let's say that, is there any element a belonging to the set X such that a is related to 10 for all a belonging to capital X? Now carefully notice this. See, 2 divides 10, 5 divides 10, 1 divides 10, 10 divides 10, but 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, they does not divide 10. So this condition is not satisfied by 10. Therefore 10 is not an upper bound but a maximal element. 10 is not an upper bound but a maximal element. Same thing goes for 9. You know, if you want to relate anything with 9 from this set, then 9 is the only element which can get related to itself by the partial order. Okay, but this condition that a related to 9 for all small a belonging to the set X, this condition not satisfied because only 1, 3 and 9 can divide 9, nothing else. Got it? So this is the difference between a maximal element and a upper bound. I guess it's now clear. Got it? Okay. Acha. So now let's check what is the Zorn's lemma. So Zorn's lemma basically, Zorn's lemma. Zorn's lemma. What does Zorn's lemma say? So Zorn's lemma basically says that let X be a relation on which a partial order is imposed. Okay, that is, it is a poset. Okay, if every chain in X, if every chain in X has a upper bound, then X has a maximal element. Then X has a maximal element. Okay. Acha, I guess you people remember what is a chain. So if you have a partially ordered set or a poset, then you can, what you can do is that if you are able to, you know, extract subsets from that partial ordered set rather, and those subsets are total order. Those subsets are of total order. Okay, those that is, you know, what was total order, remember? Now either X is related to Y or Y is related to X for all XY belonging to the subset. Okay, then that subset is called a total order. So if you are able to extract those total order subsets, then those subsets are called chains. Those subsets are called chains in the partially ordered set. And if every such chain has an upper bound, then this X will have a maximal element. This is Zorn's lemma. We are not gonna get deep into it. We just gave the statement because it might be of use in the concepts of real analysis. Okay, concepts of real analysis. Now we move on to the concept of countability of sets, and before that we understand some other terms. Okay, now suppose we have two sets A and B. A and B are two sets. Okay, so and this relation basically means that A is numerically equivalent to B. What does this mean? This means that the cardinal number of A is equal to the cardinal number of B, or rather the number of elements in A is equal to the number of elements in B. This is the term, definition of the term numerically equivalent. Yeah. When is this true? Or when this relation exists? So A is numerically equivalent to B. I mean, if A is numerically equivalent to B, then there exists some F from A to B such that F is a bijection. You also remember, might be, that we had studied under functions that if there exists a function from one set to other set where this function is a bijection, then the number of elements in both the set must be same. This is what we are talking about here. Now, if A is basically the set of all natural numbers, then F is called a sequence. That is, we are talking about an arbitrary domain here. But if we change the domain to the set of all natural numbers, then the value of the function or the images of the domain become actually denote the sequence, which we will be talking about later in the real analysis concepts. Clear? This is called the sequence. Okay. A sequence, you know, we can basically write a sequence like this for say x1, x2, so on till xn. Okay, where xi is basically f of I. where I belongs to the indexing set capital I. Okay, I guess this is clear. Okay, Achha. Now let's see a theorem, a very important theorem. Okay, the theorem is basically numerical equivalence of subsets of natural numbers. So what does the theorem say? The theorem says that let Jn and Jm be non-empty subsets of natural numbers. Be non-empty subsets of natural numbers. This is not mandatory for them to be non-empty. They can be empty also. We are not specifying whether it is non-empty or empty. It can be empty also. Okay. Acha. Such that Ji. Okay. Ji basically denotes the natural numbers from 1 till I. Okay. For I equals to n or m, as we have considered the subsets. Okay. Then Jm will be numerically equivalent to Jn if and only if m equals n. Okay, if and only if m equals n. So this is pretty much easy to understand, that the number of elements of the set Jn will never be equal to the number of elements of the set Jm if m is not equal to n. There won't exist a bijection. There won't exist a bijection. The reason is very pretty much easy to see. If suppose this is Jn, if suppose this is Jn, and suppose this is Jm, and you have a set from Jn to Jm, sorry, you have a function from Jn to Jm. Okay, so suppose this is 1 2 3 4 up till n, this is 1 2 3 4 up till m. Acha, there is one thing called the law of trichotomy of real numbers, which is also applicable for natural numbers. That is, if a and b belong to some naturals, then either a less than b or a greater than b or a equal to b. One of the condition will always be followed, but they cannot be followed simultaneously. So m is either less than b or m is either greater than b if uh, m is not equal to b. If so, even if the condition is 1 1, even if the condition is 1 1, suppose the condition is 1 1. Okay, suppose this condition is 1 1, then also there will be some elements in Jm if m is greater than n. There will be some elements in Jm such that m is greater than n, which will eventually have no pre-image in Jn, and if it eventually has no pre-image in Jn, then we actually cannot define an inverse function from Jm to Jn. Therefore bijection is not possible, and the inverse is also true. If we define a function from Jm to Jn, if m is less than n, then also what will happen? We cannot map an inverse function from Jn to Jm because of some elements of Jn will not have the pre-image in Jm. Got it? Clear? So the only condition for an inverse image to be mapped from either of these sets is for m equals to n. Clear? Okay. Acha. Now, what is cardinal number? So let us also understand that. There is nothing to understand about cardinal number. So let us still say. So cardinality of A, denoted as CARD of A, will be equal to 0 if A is an empty set, will be equal to n if A is numerically equal to Jn. What is Jn? Jn is a subset of the natural number where it contains elements from 1 to n. Clear? Got it? Now we come to the very important statement of finite set. So a finite set cannot be numerically equivalent to any proper subset of itself. What do I mean by that? Suppose you have a finite set, let's say A. So A is 1 2 3 4, and you have a proper subset of A say B which has 1 2 3 as the elements. So A can never be numerically equivalent with B. It's pretty much easy to understand because there won't be any bijection from A to B, or B to A rather. B to A will be more exact from B to A. Okay, because their orders are, sorry, their order or their cardinal numbers are different. Clear? Acha, when is a set said to be infinite? If that set is not finite. So a set is infinite if it's not finite. If it's not finite. Acha, what is the condition? Rather, the most important condition for some set to be infinite. The condition is that, if A is infinite, and B is a proper subset of A, then there might exist a bijection from A to B. Okay, F is bijection. A very easy example of it is that, suppose A is the set of all natural numbers. Okay, and B is the set of all 2n such that small n belongs to set of all natural numbers. So it is a proper subset of the set of natural numbers. Okay, all the even numbers are always a proper subset of natural numbers. Now you can define a function from this to be such that f of x is equals to 2x. You can easily prove this to be a bijection. Clear? Bijection means on 2 and 1 1. Some books also refer this to as surjection and injection also, or surjective and injective rather. Also called 1 1 correspondence. 1 1 correspondence. Bijective functions are also called 1 1 correspondence. Clear? So this is the difference between a finite set and an infinite set. Clear? Now we come to a very very important definition of countably infinite sets. What is a countably infinite set? Also called denumerable sets. Countably infinite sets. In some books, it is denoted as denumerable sets. Okay, denumerable sets. So a set is countably infinite. A set is countably infinite if it is numerically equivalent to the set of all natural numbers. That is, if you have a set, let's say A, which is numerically equivalent to set of all natural numbers, that is, there exists a bijection from A to set of all natural numbers such that F is bijection. Okay, F is bijection. Then A is said to be a countably infinite set. Okay. There is one more term, a collective term rather, where sets are defined as being countable. Where sets are defined to be countable. Okay. So countable sets. What are countable sets? So if a set is finite or is countably infinite, okay, that is if there is a set, okay, which can be mapped to a subset of the set of all natural numbers where the mapping is a bijection, or if the set itself can be mapped to the set of all natural numbers where the function is still a bijection, then those two types of sets are called countable sets. I hope this much is clear. What is countable sets? What is accountable infinite sets? What is a finite set? What is when is a set is said to be numerically equivalent to some other set? I guess these portions are clear. So now we will be ending this lecture with a proof which is important. The proof says infinite set every infinite set has a countably infinite set has a countably infinite subset rather. Every infinite set has a countably infinite subset. Achha, what do I mean by this statement? So basically I mean that every infinite set has one subset which is numerically equivalent numerically. Countably infinite means what? Every infinite set of one subset which is numerically equivalent to the set of all natural numbers. Okay, every infinite set has one subset which is numerically equivalent to the set of all natural numbers. That is the meaning of being countably infinite. Clear? Acha. What can be the proof of such a statement? I think you can understand this with an example. Let's say you have A as an infinite subset. You have A as an infinite subset. You have B infinite set. Sorry. You have B to be a subset of A such that B is countably infinite. B is countably infinite. Okay. B is countably infinite, and you have some C. Okay, such that C is a subset, proper subset of B. Then you can easily find that F is a bijection. F is a bijection. Okay, so which travels from B to C. F is a bijection which travels from B to C. What is the reason behind that? Because B is an infinite set. B is an infinite set. You can easily get a bijective mapping from an infinite set to a subset of itself. We have just seen that. Clear? Now, what happens is that if you consider a mapping from the infinite set from an infinite set to the set of union C union A minus B, C union A minus B, such that Gx is equals to Fx, where x belongs to the countably infinite set B and equal to x if x belongs to the difference between A and B, then G is also bijective. This is a notion. This is a notion. Okay. Without understanding the proof, understanding this is kind of a bit difficult. So let us understand the proof first. Okay. See. Let A be a infinite set. Let A be a infinite set. Okay. What does that imply? That implies that A is not an empty set. That further implies that the cardinal number of A must be greater than equal to 1. That implies there exists some A1 which belongs to the set A. Okay. Now, what is the difference of the uh, what is the set of the difference of elements A and the element A1? Okay. Now, since A is an infinite set, the difference between A and A1 cannot also be finite, so this must also be infinite. Because if this is finite, then what is going to happen is that A will become an empty set. A will become an empty set. Clear? Okay. Because we have considered only one element in A. Getting my point? If this is finite, or rather if this is finite, okay, this is more exact, that if this is finite, then what happens is that if A would have n plus 1 element, then A difference A1 will have n elements. Okay. So if this is finite, n plus 1 will also be finite. So A will eventually become a finite set, but A is considered to be infinite set. So this must also be infinite set. Okay. Similarly, that implies that there exists some element A2 such that A2 belongs to the difference of A and A1. Clear? And again the same thing happens. That is A difference A1 A2, A1 and A2 is still an infinite set. Okay, by the same process. And if you go on doing like this, you will get that A difference A1 A2 A3, say we have done this for n times, so An is still an infinite set, and that is not equals to 5. So proceeding in this manner, what we get is that this set of elements A1 A2 and so on till An, and mind it, where Ai is not equals to Aj, for all I not equal to j, is a countably infinite subset of A, and see the reason. Understanding the reason is very, very easy. The reason is that first of all, this is a subset of A. It is pretty much visible. This is subset of A. It is pretty much visible. And what happens is that, see, A1, A2 till AN basically defines a sequence. And what is a sequence? A sequence is a bijective mapping. A sequence is a bijective mapping with where the domain is the set of all natural numbers. So you can actually inverse map this particular part. Okay, let this be B. So you can inverse map this particular part from B to the set of all natural numbers. And what does then this function actually mean? That this is still a bijection. This is still a bijection. And B is the set of the sequences. B is the set of the sequences. And if B is the set of the sequences, then F is a bijection. If inverse is a bijection rather from B to the set of all natural numbers, then what does B become? B becomes a countably infinite set. B becomes a countably infinite set. Clear? B becomes a countably infinite set of A. Of so this is all about today, guys. This was a very pretty difficult topic to say. In the next lecture, I might be bringing you some more concepts on uh, countable sets. Okay, so meet you guys in the next lecture.